jog your memory, last April, we approved a contract for TSI, Transportation Solutions Inc., to do an update and review of our transportation impact fee. It is recommended that we look at our impact fees every 3 to 5 years because our priorities may change, our comprehensive plan gets updated, and of course we just updated the 2024 comprehensive plan. And so Andrew Rotling is here from TSI tonight, and he's available to answer any questions. I'm going to go through just a brief presentation of the alternatives, and then I'll see if Andrew has anything to add, and then we can go to the question and answer portion of the discussion. So Port Orchard first adopted transportation impact fees back in 2015, and transportation impact fees are assessed on new development to mitigate the impacts of that new development on the city's roads. It is not a fee that is paid by existing residents. It is new development paying for the impacts of new development. We last updated our traffic impact fee rates, like I said, initially in 2015, and then we updated in 2021. Adjusting the list, the fee went up at that time. We really wanted to prioritize funding Bethel, and so we put more projects on the list, which caused the fee to increase. And we have completed a handful of projects since then. Traffic impact fees are based on trip generation, the number of trips generated by a land use. And in our case, we use peak PM trips, which is a trip that occurs between the hours of 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. On a weeknight. And so, for reference, the 10th edition of the ITE manual, which is the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual, says that the average single-family home generates 0.99 peak PM trips. And now in the 11th edition, which we would be adopting as part of updating this ordinance, that has actually gone down because people are driving less, presumably from teleworking and other changes in behavior, and now it's 0.95 peak PM trips. So when we adopt a traffic impact fee rate, it's going to be a rate per peak PM trip, and then you multiply that times the trip generation for the particular use to figure out how much in impact fees a use would end up paying. So before you tonight, we've gone through the list of eligible projects, and we've developed 3 alternatives, alternative A, B, and C. And I've provided in the staff report there is a peak PM trip rate as well as a single-family trip rate. And so the single-family trip rate is just 0.95 times the peak PM rate to get that reduced amount that you would pay per single-family dwelling. If you have an apartment, it's going to be even a lower rate. If you have a big box store, it's going to be many peak PM trips times that peak PM rate. And so the alternatives are based on project lists, and when you scroll to page, I think it's 469 of your packet, you'll see the project list associated with alternative A, followed by the project list for alternative B, and then alternative C. And each list adds more and more projects to the list, and those projects then become eligible for us to spend impact fee money that's been collected to make those improvements. So if you want revenue to fix road projects, it needs to be on the list. Likewise, if we want developers to build this, which is ideal because we don't have the bandwidth to take on a lot of construction projects at one time, if we determine that a project is required to serve development, they're entitled to a credit against the impact fees that they owe if they build a project, but it has to be on the list in order for them to be eligible for credit. So we started with alternative A, and we worked with the mayor and the Public Works Department and my planning staff to really try to identify the projects that are either very likely to happen in the near future, or which we think are the most ripe for having a developer come and build the project in exchange for an impact fee credit, because that saves the city money in terms of not having to build the project itself. You'll see that each of the projects then has an assumption for how much grant funding we're expecting on each of the projects, the City of Port Orchard share, and then the growth share, which is a subset of the total project cost. And you total that up and divide it by the amount of peak PM trips that we're expecting over the planning period, and that gives you your peak PM trip rate. And so we've really massaged the list as best as possible. Alternative A is a slight increase over where it is now, but we really tried to have an alternative that was pretty close to today's number, but had the right mix of projects so that we could spend the money where it's needed, and that we could offer
credits to developers who build these projects against what they would owe for their development. And then the alternative C is basically all the projects that are eligible and just saying we want to fund everything. And it, of course, increases the fee quite a bit to just over $10,000 per peak PM trip, which would be, not quite double what it is today, but considerably more than what it is today. So with that, Andrew, is there anything I missed or that you would like to add to what I've presented to the City Council?
No, thanks, Nick. Thank you, Council. Nick, that was a great explanation. I think the transportation impact fee concept, can be computationally complex, but in broad strokes, you've described it very well, Nick. It's essentially a mechanism for growth, paying for growth's share of infrastructure impacts. So in the case of transportation, we've gone through a pretty thorough process of updating the city's forecasting model and the assumptions that go along with that, as well as the project list and the project costs. So what you see here are a menu of options that really all would, they would suit various needs that the city will have, but there's discretion to the council to pick one that would make the most sense for you.
And I would just add, I met with the Kitsap Home Builders Association this morning, and so I let them know that we're starting discussions on this and that there's a report in the packet. And I explained to them that if you think the fee is too high, the way to reduce the fee is to take a project off the list, and if you think the fee is too low, adding projects to the alternative is going to cause it to go up. The other thing that you can do, which I don't know that is as wise, is tinkering with the growth share percentage, because if you increase growth share as a percentage, which there are limitations, you shouldn't charge more than what impacts are attributed to growth, but you can certainly charge less, but that's going to create a funding gap, meaning you don't have enough money to actually build the project, and either you need more grant money, you need more general fund money, or you're going to have to identify some other revenue source. So I always think it's better to remove projects from the list rather than reducing the percentages, because if you reduce the percentage, you just have an unrealistic project in the program because you don't have it fully funded. Whereas if you take the project off the list, you're sort of telling the project, look, we can't afford to do this project, and therefore it's coming off the list, and it's not going to happen, at least in this near-term planning cycle, and it can be added again in the future when we revisit this.
What did the Builders Association, what was their feedback when you told them we're doing this?
They didn't give any initial feedback. I think that they were thankful that I told them about it, and they said that they were going to take a look at it, and I assume they will reach out to the City Council if they have comments. I suspect they're going to prefer alternative A. They would probably prefer to see the fee go down, but I also explained to them that I said, look, if we find a developer comes in and their project causes an impact and they have to fix a road that's not on this list, they're not going to be eligible for credit for doing that work. So, be careful what you wish for, because if you take a project off the list, suddenly you're going to reduce the amount of credit that's available to sort of either.
Why is Tremont still on this list?
Because we still have debt associated with Tremont, so we're still paying off the loans for the Tremont Street project. And it was impact fee funded. We have not yet spent any transportation impact fee money, to my knowledge, paying back that debt, but we are able to. So if we had an economic downturn and suddenly the general fund is tight, we could use impact fee monies to make payments against the debt on that project, because it added capacity to the system.
Okay.
I got a couple questions. The fees last time in 2021, do we have an idea what the gap was between what we projected collecting in impact fees and what our actual expenses were? In other words, should we have had gone up with a higher model because of both inflation and cost of construction going up?
I think that the problem. So first of all, I think the revenue has actually come in as projected, but the projects are costing a lot more than we anticipated. And so fortunately, we did build a CPI adjustment into our ordinance. So every year the impact fee does go up by the CPI.
I remember that.
The problem is that the transportation and construction costs have been going up at a higher rate than the CPI, and so we're falling behind. But the way to fix that is to make sure that the project cost in your calculation is correct, or that it's anticipating where the cost is going to be in the future. If you're short on the estimates, you're going to have a funding shortfall.
I think Heidi, in answer to your question, at least for when I've been on the time I've been on the council, KPA would prefer that we keep the increases as low as possible, and that's why trying to figure out the difference in the gap has always been, an interesting one, because that just gets passed on to the home builders in a lot of cases. My other question, Nick, was, on this one is, where does, and this is kind of a tangent, so I apologize, where does something like the Stetson Heights come in, where it's the city of Bremerton, but using, their only access is through, for lack of better words, our streets?
You mean Sinclair Ridge?
Sinclair Ridge, yeah, right.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so
Sinclair.
interestingly, when Sinclair Ridge was proposed back in 2016, we wrote comment letters to the city of Bremerton saying, hey, this project has impacts on our streets. Bremerton was very considerate of Port Orchard's needs, and they imposed conditions on the plat through SEPA and said that Sinclair Ridge would pay a SEPA-based mitigation fee. And so SEPA-based mitigation fees are totally different from the GMA, Growth Management Act, impact fee framework, but we are taking in money with every permit that goes out until that project is fully built out. I think it's around $3,000 per house, maybe $2,500 per house. And based on the SEPA condition, there's a specific list of projects that are eligible for those funds. And so Old Clifton Road, Anderson Hill Roundabout, the McCormick Woods Drive intersection, there are different things that we can spend that money on, and it's fairly flexible as long as it's one of the eligible projects. There's not a limit on what percent goes to which project. And so I believe that in your 2025-26 biennial budget, we have funded Anderson Hill Road's roundabout to go to 100% design and permitting.
Right.
The idea is that with the Sinclair Ridge mitigation money, there's some McCormick mitigation money from prior to us combining the McCormick system with the city system for transportation impact fees.
Right.
Those funding sources are enough for us to fund that project locally, and we're planning to take that forward, and that's how we'll use those funds.
Can I do one more question? So, if you don't mind walking me through, now and I understand that we are looking at doing the Anderson Hill. The McCormick Woods entry, my understanding is that is possibly a developer's project. So how does that interface with the spending of impact fees and credits?
So it's not possibly, it's definitely a developer-funded project at this point, because it's in the development agreement between McCormick Communities and the city. They have to do intersection improvements at McCormick Woods Drive and Old Clifton Road. We've delayed the timing for that project once, and we're talking to them right now about delaying it again until probably 2028, 2029.
Okay.
But ultimately, they're responsible for that, and they receive an impact fee credit that is, when you do a development agreement for an impact fee credit, they are able to receive the lesser of what they actually spent, what they owe on their project, or what was assumed in our impact fee calculation. And so I think it's like 1.75 million, and then that had a CPI adjustment to it, so it's now maybe 2.
So very similar like our reservoirs and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you, John.
Nick, I've got a couple. The cost projections that are on these charts you're giving us here, they're based on today's dollars, is that correct?
Correct. Chris Hammer, our city engineer, did update all of the project cost estimates with the exception of Tremont, which we know the final construction cost, and has tried to get a best guess as to what these things are going to cost in today's dollars, and then they would be subject to the CPI going forward. But it's hard to say whether construction costs are going to continue to escalate at the rate that they have been over the past 5 years. It doesn't seem sustainable to me. It's certainly possible, but that's why it's important that we look at this every 3 to 5 years. And if something has gone haywire with inflation, or if development slows down and the revenue slows down, we may want to look at the denominator that's used in the formula to ensure that we're bringing in adequate revenue to fund our planned projects.
So just out of curiosity, how are our current impact
So I think we're pretty close to Gig Harbor and Paulsbo right now. I think we're a little bit less than Kitsap County. I think they just adopted transportation impact fees for the first time, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know what their rate is. I think within the region we're pretty average. Last time I checked, like the east side of Lake Washington, you were seeing like $14,000 per peak PM trip. Andrew, I know you had a table 5 years ago that had a comparison. Do you know where we are?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull that up, but you're exactly right, Nick. You as Port Orchard are right in the wheelhouse, kind of the mid-range, which, you know, in my opinion, is kind of where you want to be. You don't necessarily want to be right at the top, but you don't want to be the very lowest impact fee or not have an impact fee in the case of your neighbor to the north. But they will soon, I think.
And is that in today's impact fee or the proposed impact fee?
Well, you know,
Depends on the
the
alternative.
range of impact fees is pretty broad. So with today's impact fee, yes, you're right in the middle of the wheelhouse. If you made a modest increase, you'd still be right there. If you chose the highest option, which is that $10,000 option per PM peak hour trip, you'd be moving up the list, but I don't think you would be in even the top third of the, you know, Western Washington impact fee states.
And I
I
think
think every local agency has seen really significant, I can't say every, but most agencies have seen significant impact fee increases these past couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to remember too that, you know, it's been 4 years since we did this, made the last adjustment, and we're talking about 3 to 5 more years before we make another adjustment. So keep that in your back of your minds when you're considering the options here, because can we come back early and readjust?
I think you could still use this study to choose one of the other alternatives if you decided that, you know what, we want to revisit this and go to alternative B rather than alternative A. But I think that, Andrew, you'd probably want to touch the report if we waited too long before making the adjustment.
Yeah, one of the things to keep in mind is that the impact fee is really methodologically tied to your comprehensive plan. And so the growth that's assumed as part of your impact fee calculation is the growth that's described in your comp plan. So, you know, you can make certain changes to the impact fee, but ultimately it still ties back into your comprehensive plan. Now, for example, if costs change, if inflation runs out of control, you can change your cost estimates, and maybe keep your project list and keep your growth forecast the same. So there's still dials you can turn without going in and amending your comp plan.
Heidi's got
Oh, go for it.
On these anticipated grant funding, what is the percentage that you think we can get all these grant fundings?
You mean what certainty do I have that we'll get? Well,
Yes.
some of these that are listed, we already have the grants. Others, we've identified a funding source, and the grant funding source that we've identified is proportionate to the programs that we think we're going to pursue for that grant funding source. Are we going to be 100% successful, or are we going to get the grant in the year that we hope to get the grant? You know, we have to just wait and see, but this is our best guess based on the programs that are available, whether it's Transportation Improvement Board, whether it's PSRC, RT, I forget the name of that funding source, but there's several pots of money that we go to regularly for funding, and they have different maximum amounts and different percentages and matches, and so we've made a pretty good educated guess as to what we can get for these.
Would those grants increase with the CIP?
No, I don't think so.
And I think most of them are in-space grants as I'm looking at this list.
Yeah.
Or pretty well, I think.
But we've got a few years on some of these before they
Yeah.
take place.
Yeah, like the Lund Avenue roundabout, it's 2029 for design, I think, but that's the timeline we're looking at. When we apply for a grant, we're gonna get the money in 3 to 4 years, and then we design something, and then we go to construction, and, sooner or later, it's 15 years down the road by the time you're cutting a ribbon.
Yeah, I don't like to put a stick in the sand right now, but, just with what falling construction costs and what we've seen over the last, 4 and 5 years, C take a look in a couple of years and saying, hey, do we, you could lower it as opposed to trying to raise it again. I know that's more aggressive. I know that's not popular with KBA, but I don't like any cost being funded by the existing residents of Port Orchard. And anything that would cause that to move, I know that, we do that, I'm firmly against. And I think the residents, the amount of building that we're seeing on the west side is generating quite a bit of need for these projects. And so I would go with alternative C, more aggressive one, but that's me.
So, I have a quick question. What is the correlation between the impact fee rate per trip and the SFR?
0.95. So the peak PM trip under
Okay,
alternative
so you
A
did
is,
say that.
yeah.
Okay. I was just curious on the relationship and how we got to the different dollar amounts there. And is there, and that's set in code, we can't change that,
Well,
right?
that's set in the Institute of Transportation Engineers Statistical Manual.
Yeah.
And so they republish a new edition every few years that has the latest statistical data, which is something that we can use and defend in court if we were challenged on our methodology.
Okay, and we would probably want to do, here's where I'm going with that, right? I believe that I'm going to shock people here, I think I'm in agree with Jay, and it's not that the shock about Jay, but that it's the highest dollar amount. I am generally a fiscal conservative in that aspect, but I think it's going to disproportionately impact business over development of residences, right? Because a business could be determined that they're going to have 15 or 20 peak trips.
That's exactly right.
Terminology. And so that's a huge dollar amount compared to a single family home. And as a business owner, that's my worry with a C. But again, the difference between C and A and what that's really going to mean to a business who may be staring in the eyes of a 20 trip per day type business, that could get interesting, right? And interesting, I mean, like, I don't want to put us in that spot because while we want to have people live in our homes, we want to have them be able to do things and enjoy good businesses. So I think that's my concern with it.
Doesn't that raise the homeowners' homes though, if you're gonna go high on impact?
It does, right? That's a discussion here because that's what we have to kind of balance. That's our job.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm trying to say is there a way to, well, I may be okay with, and we just know the cost of building a home goes up, right? As does the cost of creating the infrastructure for those homes. And at least in those instances, per se, we know more cars are being put on the road. This could be the repurposing of a existing building, and they're still impugned with impact fees because now more cars may be visiting a grocery store than, say,
Mini storage.
okay, there you go, mini storage that somebody doesn't go to at least
Yeah.
once a week. I gotta go to the grocery store once a week. So I think that's my concern.
Andrew, I don't know how much time you have, but do you have any thoughts? Have you talked to Victor about whether there's a way to sort of reduce the impacts on commercial while still collecting it on residential, or are we pretty much stuck with the peak PM trip model based on the changes in state law?
Yeah, I mean, there is room within the state law to make adjustments to commercial trip generation. One example I'm thinking of is Mount Vernon, who charges a significantly lower trip rate for commercial development. In their case, it's with the understanding that commercially zoned areas are primarily oriented along the interstate, and so have minimal impact on city streets.
grocery store and my dry cleaner's right next door, I'm not making more than one trip. So I guess my follow-up question to that, Andrew, would be either, even if I did have a desire to lower for commercial trip rate, then I'm going to disproportionate, because I'm going to have to then raise the single family, right? Because I'm still trying to get to the same dollar amount at the end. Is that, am I understanding it correctly?
Yeah, you're on the right track there. It's unfortunately at some level a zero-sum game. So, you know, you can reduce the impacts on commercial development. You will proportionally increase the impacts on either new residential development or, of course, existing residents.
Okay. Jay?
Yeah, and just, you know, something to remember as we go into this discussion, because we're not gonna decide anything tonight, is I can't think of a project, and I know Nick and Jim, you probably could, you know, where we haven't started with the design work and saying this is what we think the project's gonna cost, and then with construction costs over the last 8 years, watching that project double. I mean, from anything from the Marina Pump Station to Tremont. And again, I think, well, I appreciate the comments, Andrew and Nick, the idea of taking a look at the business side of the house, you know, clustering, you know, that is something worth a thought. It's the individual, you know, families that are coming in and causing this growth, and we're responsible for the infrastructure. And if we don't keep these projects on target, we're gonna end up having a major issue that we're seeing with Bethel, because nothing touched Bethel for years, and we're paying that both in dollars and politically. I mean, I'm just, you know, stating the fact that we can't allow that to happen anywhere else.
I agree. I have a hard time with that increasing what is already $118,000 before you put a shovel in the ground for a house, right? Like that adding to that just seems counterintuitive to me. I understand where you're coming from. Like I want to go to C, but I also hear, because I'm with you. I went to the roads.
I'm just like
we're going to need those, but it's.
Yeah.
Fred.
How to afford a house.
I have a follow-up question for Andrew, which is, if we went with C, it would be nice to see how that compares with Gig Harbor, Bremerton, Kitsap County, our immediate neighbors, not just the third in the state. But
No, that's a good point. I can pull together a little comparison for you within the next couple of days and send it to Nick and distribute it on if that would be helpful.
The last thing before I
No, I just, just no, real quick. When you do that, could you please note when they did their impact fees? Because if they did it like in 2020, they may be having an increase coming up also. So it would be nice to know that information.
That's a good point. And one thing you will see with a lot of agencies is that last year or this year or maybe next year, they'll be adopting pretty significant impact fee updates because of the comprehensive plan cycle and periodic update season. So I'll share a comparison worksheet of what they are as of today, as best we can figure it. With the sort of caveat that I know a few cities, and actually a few I'm working with, that are in progress of updating theirs.
The other question I had, Nick, for you, maybe is a better question for you rather than Andrew. The dollars per plan, right? So Plan A is looking for around $60, where Plan B is looking at 77, and Plan C is looking at $87 million. Is there another configuration of projects that get us where that's maybe instead of being 17 to 10, that maybe there's some jockeying of projects? I don't know. I'm just throwing something out there so this doesn't sting as hard as it looks like it's going to, but it's the medicine I think we need to take, right? So I don't know the answer here, and I'm not ready to make that, but I'm looking for as much flexibility as possible for when we're going to need to make that.
you said the mayor made this list?
The mayor attended meetings where we were trying to trim this down, and we wanted to make sure that we had an alternative A that was close to where it is today, but had a slightly different mix to recognize what grants we've received, where we have funding gaps, and making sure that we could spend impact fee money on the right projects at the right time.
I think also some of this comes out of the TIF, doesn't it?
The tip?
Yeah, transportation improvement, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, and that's part of the comp plan discussion we're having tonight, is we are refreshing the tip. There's a handful of
It's-
changes.
Yeah, so
Does transportation discuss that with us?
I'm not on the transportation committee. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, they've seen it, and
Do
it's,
you agree with the list the mayor came up with?
Well-
This list here?
they haven't seen the impact fee list. They've seen the transportation improvement program, which also includes maintenance projects. Maintenance projects aren't eligible for traffic impact fees because they're not adding capacity to the city's roadways.
Do you know something about that?
No, I think we've covered it.
Okay. Were you looking for a consensus, sir,
Well,
or you just want
I
to get
guess-
this in front of us before we bring it to a meeting?
Yeah, we don't have another work study until July, so this can go back to the transportation committee. If there's a strong feeling that, we could hold a public hearing on the alternatives and get input from the public, if that's the direction that you'd like to go. I'm looking for direction on next steps. We're aiming to adopt the comp plan amendments in June, and we can't adopt this until after the comp plan is adopted with our new tip. So, the earliest we can adopt is June, but we canceled our work study in June, so, where do we go from here? I think transportation committee is probably a good place, but I think that your thoughts need to be articulated to the committee so that they know what to look at. And it sounds like maybe you want to consider reducing the impact on commercial development to some extent, and so maybe, like you said, if you,
There's a lot more time.
yeah.
I'm interested in discussing a little bit more about the zonal area. So, for example, the downtown core area, providing maybe a little relief within this district.
I think one of the challenges there is we do have projects in our downtown on the list, and so if you isolate downtown as its own district, development downtown has to pay for the projects downtown, and they become two separate areas of accounting. And so if all the development is in McCormick Woods, but we're gonna do the Bay Street project, and we also have another project taking Bay Street with sidewalks all the way up Bethel to the roundabout in Mile Hill, downtown would be responsible for that, and there's not enough growth downtown to actually pay for it. So I don't know that that's gonna get you, yeah, so there's so much variability as you start adding projects or taking them away, and when you create districts, there's all sorts of unintended consequences. I think that, I can't speak for Noah because he's not here, but I suspect that he would prefer not to have to account for two separate areas of the city.
Maybe we should have a public hearing.
So, well, can I say this before you even, I would like to suggest that transportation committee give a good eagle eye to these projects and understand what their recommendation would be for us to truly know, one, what's feasible, and I guess it doesn't really matter if it's the next 4 years because we need to collect these dollars anyhow, but and making sure that, hey, these are all the projects that we need to make sure and that they're a priority and to what level, for which recommendation. That's the one thing I didn't spend time on, is the projects.
Sorry, so Noah is online, if you guys do have any questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think
Hey, Janine, I just wanted to report, I lost visual. I don't know if others can see it online, but it looks like we lost visual of me.
Oh, no, okay. Thank you,
is
Noah.
everybody here that's just straw poll?
Yeah, when you said, are you,
Just straw poll. Anybody here interested in alternative A at all? I've heard a couple of C's.
No, I'm not interested in C, but I would, be more on, A and B. But I think maybe you said something about maybe we let the public know, have a hearing on it. So I think that's a good idea.
Well, the public I want to hear from is people who want to buy a house here, they can't because they aren't in houses. So how do we ask people who aren't here, how do they get to buy a house? Do they want the house, even if it's 2,000 more, or, I don't know.
I don't know.
Because the residents here are not affected by this.
Are we gonna lose audio?
If you're buying a second.
Are we gonna lose audio if you reset that?
Should, yeah, just in the woods.
So Heidi,
Where to buy.
in looking at Schedule A here, flat line from where we've been
Yeah, that's not
from
much
4
of
years
an
ago
impact.
till 4 or 5 years further down the road here. And we're not gonna be able to afford that
Mhm.
if we stay with, the way I'm reading this, if we stay with Schedule A. We've got to make some changes here, because our costs have increased dramatically.
Yeah, well, we just got this, and I'd like to go over it
Sure,
more,
sure.
100%.
Are you, who's all on transport? I don't even know who I'm.
Diener, me,
Okay, so you're gonna see it, you're gonna spend a ton of time
oh, yeah.
in transportation with it, so,
But we haven't had a transportation meeting for a while either.
Well, this will be coming up.
this will be
Yeah.
coming up, is what we're
Yeah,
saying, so,
exactly.
yeah, so we're
Exactly.
not making a decision, but I think he's trying to get some guidance for your committee chair.
No, Scott is.
Oh, Scott is, okay. To kind of give some direction on what we want you guys to consider, right? For me, again, it's what projects are on that list, and is that the right mix of projects?
I think
Aren't they pretty?
one of the things that I would say, having been on the transportation committee before, is there's not a project on this list that isn't needed. It's more what's the priority of the projects and funding. So I just want to make that clarification because I don't want to say, oh, we should take this off. It's like, we can't take any of this off. They're all needed. It's just a question of how do we do it. One of the benefits I think that has been, and I know the mayor's been very big on this, and I know Nick's assisted along with other folks, is seeing what projects that we can get with the developers to do, because that seems to have been a boom both for the developers and for the city to have them complete projects. It seems they come in at a lower cost overall, both to the benefit of the city. So that's another thing to take a look at.
But only if they're on the list.
I understand that, and that's what I'm saying is, looking at the list, there's nothing I haven't seen before. It's more the priority of the list.
Yep.
So, but I think you're right. I think transportation committee is the first way to go, and move from there. I'm going to say this, and I'm sure it's going to get me a little bit in trouble, but when you look at C and somebody says, well, it may slow growth down, I'm not so sure that's a bad thing to a certain degree.
And that was gonna be, because I kind of want to put a bow on this.
Yeah.
Is that, because we're not making any decisions tonight, right?
Yeah.
We're moving it on, but we have the lion's share of growth for our county when it comes to comp plan. We have the highest of any other city.
Well, Bremerton is larger than us.
But
And
they-
Silver.
But they're not taking, their future growth is not as high as our number is.
No, it is because they're
Is it?
metropolitan cities and core cities, which are a higher order of regional geography.
That change?
But Bainbridge Island, Kingston, Paulsbo, and Port Orchard, which we're all the same high-capacity transit community, we have the largest share of that group.
And we're also exceeding our growth rate.
We are
right now.
growing faster than we need
And
to
it's-
relative to our target.
Yes, and that's why I'm saying is,
For residential, not for employment.
no, understand.
Well, and so that's, when I'm coming at that, right, is that, one, I've always told the mayor, we're gonna grow faster than what this comp plan says anyhow. But two, I also think that while that's happening, we need to, that's also why I'm almost in for C, because that's not gonna slow it as much as you think it is, because it's coming whether or
Didn't,
not we
I
like it.
did say
And
it
we may
was,
as well
yeah.
fund the stuff when we know how to fund it now, because that growth is here, so, okay.
Cool.
Any last comments?
One quick comment is, we have heard people complain that they wish that we had built the roads before development came, which is not possible.
No.
No, but that, we have heard that complaint.
Yeah.
And this is maybe the closest, I think, that we
The
can get to
perfect,
something.
the perfect example of that is on Bethel, like Blueberry and Bethel. Too bad that roundabout's not there.
Well, where's that money gonna come from? Our current tax-paying citizens would have to put that money up to build those projects before people brought those apartments in. And none of us here wanna put that burden, that type of burden on our citizens.
Yeah, we don't have it.
Not all. Okay, moving on, thank you, Andrew, we appreciate your time here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Middle housing code amendment, Mr. Baum, Mr. Fitz.
Jim has been leading the charge on middle housing because we have too many mandates right now, so I'm gonna let him present.
You get a lot. housing code amendments. As you know, in fall 2022, we started our comp plan update, our periodic update. And so we spent about 2 years on that, and the council passed that. They adopted it in December, and it became effective December 18th. That update focused on incorporating GMA requirements, PSRC, and Vision 2050 requirements, and updated it to be consistent with countywide planning policies. Meanwhile, while we were doing all of this, the state legislature passed a series of bills related to housing. House Bill 1110 related to middle housing. 1337 was accessory dwelling units, and then there is a provision in RCW that addresses unit lot subdivisions. So after we adopted the comprehensive plan, that undoubtedly created a need for us to update our development regulations to be consistent with the goals and policies adopted by the City Council. So HB 1110, that's the middle housing ordinance or bill, requires planning cities to allow middle housing in all predominantly residential districts by the end of June this year. And for Port Orchard, that means the R1, R2, and R3 districts. So we fully intend on adopting these so that we are not, our code is not superseded by Commerce's guidance. And where our code conflicts, then that Commerce guidance would overrule our locally adopted regulations, which is slightly problematic, so we don't want to be in that. So initially we approached the City Council, and the Council gave us direction to pursue Tier 2 city regulations. There have been some things that have come up well, since we adopted the comp plan, that's kind of we've had to refocus our efforts. And so what we're really trying to do right now is to adopt an ordinance that's compliant with Tier 3 requirements. The difference, it's pretty minor between the two, the way that we've drafted this ordinance. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with our development code, but City of Port Orchard has a model code. It's a form-based code, which we don't dictate densities like other jurisdictions do. So like Kitsap County, you might have something like a residential 4.5, which means you can put 4.5 dwelling units per acre. We don't have that currently. What our code does is it establishes minimum lot sizes and the type of building that can be on that lot. So currently, except for backyard cottages and apartments, the city only allows one building per lot. And so you can see in this graph here, in the R1 district, you're allowed to have a detached house plus 1 ADU. R2 district, you can have 2 units, which is something like a duplex. R3, you can be looking at 4-plex, but there's no max on apartments in R3. Apartments that's the first place they're introduced. And then R4 and R5, those are the higher density residential districts, and they allow apartments primarily. The way our lot area is currently considered, it is dictated by the way the property is accessed by a vehicle, either by an alley or a primary street. And depending on that, that is going to dictate the size of the lot. So you can see in the bottom table here, a detached house in the R1 district, where you're fronting a street, the minimum lot size has to be 6,000 square feet. However, if there were an alley, you could have a 5,000 square foot lot. And if you kind of go across, you can see that where there's a primary street, for the most part, it's 5,000 square foot minimum, but with alley access, those lot sizes are reduced. Also here, you can see that detached house is really the only residential building type that's allowed in the R1 district. Duplex is not allowed there. That's, you first see that in R2, we've kind of covered that. And then townhouses, 4-plexes, etc. So the proposed residential zoning, which is in that large packet, sorry, but there's a lot that goes into it. Detached houses and middle housing density will be based on establishing the number of dwelling one building per lot and goes to a unit density count. So in the R1 district, you would be allowed to have 2 dwelling units. That means that a duplex would now be allowed in R1.
In addition to a house?
No.
Okay, instead of a house.
But you bring up a good point. R1 does allow a detached house, and with the ADU ordinance, we'll talk about that a little bit later, there's kind of a discrepancy between 1337 and 1110, where the legislature requires us to allow two ADUs per lot, and then 1110 says, well, you have to allow 2 dwelling units in this predominantly residential zone. So there's kind of a conflict there, and what it ends up in discussion with Commerce is that if there's a detached house in R1, we will then allow 2 ADUs on that lot to be consistent with 1337.
Which is 3 units.
So it's 3,
Yeah.
but alternatively, you could build a duplex with no ADU because you've already hit that unit density.
And you should think about it this way, ADUs are limited to 1,000 square feet per unit, whereas a duplex, you could have 2,000-3,000 square foot units attached, and so you could still end up with more square footage of housing under the duplex scenario.
So what we proposed in R1, 2 dwellings per lot, R2, 4, R3, 6, but again, there's no max on apartments. It's the first place that's introduced. R4 and R5, again, those are primarily higher density residential. So to get that unit mix, it can be a combination of housing types. So in the R2 district, you might have 2 duplex buildings, meaning 4 units on that one lot. And then we've kind of taken a look at our lot sizes, and we've applied a standard across all the zones. And really that's 5,000 square feet if it has that primary access. And then if it's alley access, and I need to correct that because it says R1 alley street. Anyway, 5,000 square feet if there's primary access, and if it's provided via an alley, it's 3,000 square feet. So you can see that's pretty consistent through all the building types. We have also tried to kind of consolidate a lot of our design standards into the building type. So here, this is an example of the setbacks, and trying to create clarity for each zone. So you can see that minimum lot area and minimum lot width for alleys, alley served lots, and primary street served. And then you have your setbacks, and those largely remain unchanged. However, ADUs, which you see as backyard cottage, we have to, per 1110, regulate them the same as we would a detached house, meaning you could theoretically have a backyard cottage in your front yard now, because they're subject to the same setbacks on that lot. And so most of this does not change. It's just kind of where we're putting things.
What are we looking, is that a presentation or is that the final packet? Because what we looked at kept saying, for setbacks, look at the district information.
So this comes from the
Is this your summary or?
this comes from that district.
Yeah, we put together a PowerPoint to try to simplify the discussion, and so this is the example of what the R2 zone looks like now.
No, those designations on the right are not in the packet. It will say, refer to
This
district for
presentation
setbacks.
was in the packet.
No, it's not.
So this is from 20.34, the residential. Where you're seeing that refer to the district, that's in 20.32, specific to the building type. So if you're looking at a detached house, you're right, it says refer to district standards, and it'll send you here so that we're keeping all of that stuff in one location as far as setbacks.
I have kind of I'm sorry, I probably should know this, but I don't. Where we talk about putting multiple units on a lot, does that then allow the owner to split the?
We're getting there. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, so
Great question.
Right, subdivide.
yeah, this is, because that's really critical.
Okay,
You know,
so keep this term in
He
mind.
didn't pay me to ask that question.
Keep this term in mind from this table, this middle
Mhm.
part where it says principal buildings, parent lot. We're gonna get to
in your bullets about the proposed changes? Or are you getting to that? Or have you passed it?
I was only gonna give the one example.
Okay, well, my question is, it says there's no unit cap in R3, which is interesting, because like you're allowed to build 6 dwelling units per lot. But
So for detached houses and middle housing building types, you're capped at 6 units.
Okay.
But if you build an apartment, then there's no cap on the number of units.
Okay.
We have a form-based code, and
Okay.
we don't set a high density, a high maximum density.
So this is where you could build your micro units or your singles.
There's all sorts of things
Theoretically.
we do, but you
Yeah.
have to meet all the other code requirements, so you parking, landscaping, setbacks, and that kind of constricts the developable area. And so it's really difficult if somebody comes in and says, how many units can I put in an apartment here? We don't have an answer for that because they have to design it. We just have to give them the tools to get there.
No, I thought that was exciting because we haven't really had many micro units or singles or studios.
Sure.
I thought, huh.
Do we have any, land that's designated that's only for middle housing and you can't build an apartment?
The R1 and R2, if this is adopted, will be detached houses in middle housing
Uh-huh.
only.
Oh, okay. And then on the middle housing, you got triple, so is that 3 layers going up right here on this?
Triplex, you mean?
Yeah, sorry, triplex.
Yeah,
So
that's
that goes 3 levels,
3 units.
well, 3 units.
It could be
But
3
is that-
stack though, right?
But it looks like it's,
This is, this example isn't based on our code. This is from a consultant that wrote a book on middle housing. And so these are the terms that they used. State law has slightly different terms than what you see. This is just illustrating the range of housing that falls under kind of the middle housing umbrella.
right, so when I look at, well, if I look at that, it looks like it's 3 levels. So is it 3
That can be
levels,
done-
or is it 3, like townhouses, 1, 2, and 3?
So what you're looking at there, the triplex stacked, there's a building type in the proposed amendments that's called a stacked flat.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can have up to 3 dwelling units in that building, but each floor is an independent unit.
Okay, 1 floor, 1 single dwelling, 2, and
Correct.
3. And then when does it become like an apartment, number 4 height, levels
Well,
going up?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on a lot of things, but like the zoning's going to set your maximum height limit. But typically an apartment has 5 or more units in it.
Yeah, and it's horizontally and vertically mixed. So there's units on top of each other and next to each other, whereas a stacked flat is just 1 unit per floor going up the building.
Correct. So, yeah, so this is just an example of what that missing middle housing is. And so the detached house, obviously, on the left there, and then apartments as you go to the right. So everything kind of in between is the middle housing. And so what we're required to incorporate are these building types, with the exception of detached house, the duplex, triplex, fourplex, fiveplex, sixplex, all the plexes, townhouse, stacked flats, courtyard apartment, forecourt apartment, and cottage housing. So we've created a table and said, okay, here are all our zoning districts, here are all of our building types. So it goes from detached house down to mixed-use shop fronts and accessory buildings. And we've identified what districts they are allowed to be built. We've also, in this section, taken a lot of what is in our residential design standards and incorporated that into the basic components of what that building must consist of. So it has a certain transparency, number of windows facing a street, a minimum ground floor elevation, meaning when you walk to your house, the ground floor has to be X feet. In this case, we've set it at 12 inches above the grade. So that really encourages having porches and things like that. We've also made some refinements regarding entry orientation and design elements, and that's based on some of the guidance from Commerce and also what's in HB 1110. We've incorporated blank wall treatment. There's a pretty good example of where our current code is a little bit deficient in that there is an ADU that has been built in the city with a wall that faces the street, and there are no windows, no doors, there's nothing on it. So the blank wall means that they can't have a wall greater than, I hate to do this by memory, greater than 15 feet in width, without some sort of articulation or some sort of transparency. There has to be something on that wall besides just lap siding, the door, yeah. And then we've also clarified parking locations. And then again, this table, we had building types where they're permitted in several parts of the code, so we kind of stripped that out, put it all in this table, and that's what you're seeing referred to this table, etc. So then we had to look at 20.139, and it's important to note that the middle housing bill requires that we not put any more restrictive requirements on middle housing than we otherwise would for detached houses, meaning anything that we require for
recording in progress.
Anything that we,
I think you're muted now. That's what happened in our planning commission meeting last week, is it kept crashing. Are you still recording?
Yep.
Doesn't move like it.
Now the red dot's in the corner.
Wasn't it?
so anything we apply for detached houses, we can for middle housing. And so there's a few statements in our residential design standards that are kind of qualitative, meaning the person reviewing it can use their best judgment to see if it satisfies code. We've eliminated that and really tried to make checklists, like a menu of options, so developers can come in and say, okay, I've done this, I've done that, I've done this. The plan reviewer says, okay, they've done this and that, and then send them out the door. So it's very predictable process. And we tried to simplify all of it for detached houses and middle housing. We've clarified some facade transparency calculation. In the past, we've gone back and forth with developers and home builders about that, and so it just made sense. I've talked about the blank wall treatment, and then we've made some refinements to our building elements in regard to porches, stoops, forecourts, and actually included another building element called a landing. And so all of these things you're going to see they come together, but we've tried to make it so that it's more of a quantitative review rather than something that somebody in a back office is saying, yeah, that looks right. A forecourt? It's kind of an open courtyard that's bound by a building.
So it's three sides on a building are around a forecourt. So it's when you create like a little grass area in front of an apartment or something.
And then currently we have some standards regarding garage face and the width that can be, and it's based on lot width, and that varies from district to district. What we've done is taken some of the commerce guidance and applied that so that it is very specific to whatever lot it's on and not to the residential zoning district that it's in, meaning you are going to have 60% of your lot width can be occupied by a garage space and or driveway. And so there's a calculation in 20.124. We've included this graphic in there that illustrates that and how you get there. So 20.124 is our parking and circulation. So that touches on residential development. You're going to park a car or drive a car somewhere. This would apply to those development standards. And so when we adopted the form-based code, the building code had not yet caught up with electric vehicle requirements. Since then, the building code has adopted some standards for EV parking. And so we're proposing to essentially repeal that section in the land use code because there's some conflicts between the land use code and what is actually required in the building code. So we're going to rely entirely on the building code, and that doesn't change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, so it's very predictable. Also, more recently, the legislature adopted Senate Bill 5184, and that greatly changes the amount of off-street parking that cities can require. So we've had this conversation with Land Use and Planning Commission. And I should say that, and forgive me, we've taken this to Planning Commission, some variation of these code sections to the Planning Commission since the adoption of the comp plan. So we've been talking about it all year. We brought it to the Land Use Committee, kind of on the same time frame. So they've all looked at this as well. So 5184 essentially puts the burden on a developer or property owner to determine how much parking is actually required for their development. So there's no longer an arbitrary number where a city says you have to have 3 stalls per 1,000 square feet of whatever chiropractic office. Now it's really the developer who is going to have to figure out how much parking they need is adequate to serve their development. And so that should result in smaller parking lots and reduced parking areas where that land can otherwise be used for other uses, more commercial, more residential, things like that. And then we talked a little bit about the vehicle access and driveways and how we've simplified that to be based on the lot width. So accessory dwelling units. 1337 requires that we allow at least 2 ADUs per lot, which is everything in your packet is consistent with these requirements. We've set the maximum ADU size to 1,000 square feet. There's no requirement for street improvements or owner occupancy. And I think 2 years ago, I want to say it was 2 years ago, the city council removed those owner occupancy requirements. So we were kind of ahead of the game on this. 1337 also allows the independent sale of ADUs as condominiums, and it allows the conversion of legally established accessory buildings, meaning like a detached garage, that might not meet setback requirements. Those can be converted into an ADU without seeking a variance or anything like that, that we will recognize that they can convert it to an ADU even if it encroaches into a setback. More recently, the city council adopted a couple of amendments to the ordinance regarding impact fees. ADUs are capped at 50% of the principal unit fees, and so that's going to vary depending on what that principal unit is. Say you have a duplex and you want to put an ADU in the back, well then that's going to differ than your impact fee is going to differ in that scenario than it would if it was a detached house and an ADU. Additionally, that bill prohibits CC&Rs from restricting ADU construction. A few years ago, we had a subdivision come in, and we do review their CC&Rs, and they had actually prohibited the development of ADUs, and we said, hey, you need to be consistent with this. They've changed it, so those ADUs are permitted in that subdivision. However, if you live in a subdivision with CC&Rs that do currently prohibit it, that remains unchanged.
So it's only the new.
It's only the new ones, correct.
Huh, that's a double standard.
So you had asked about subdividing essentially, and so this unit lot subdivision in 20.87, this is the chapter. This allows the division of a single parent lot, meaning lot of record that meets zoning requirements. So again, 5,000 square foot lot, you can divide that into unit lots, fee simple lots essentially, and sell it. So if you have a detached house and an ADU, you could use the unit lot subdivision process to divide that ADU from it, where it then becomes principal, and sell it.
If you're finished, I have one question on this. So, with ADUs, existing CCRs, prohibiting ADUs, does this apply then also to division of lots, subdivision of lots also? Because, my question is that, well, downtown, I'll just take historic Port Orchard, where somebody could divide a lot out in the, if you go into McCormick Woods, they have some very, very large sizes, and not that, you know, that houses aren't that old anyway. But could somebody subdivide their lot, or would the CCR prohibit it as opposed to a ADU? Because I mean, they're shooting for more density.
Right.
I mean, this is the whole thing of going on with the Growth Management Act and the new laws, and you can see that from McCormick Trails, you know, the density there as opposed to Old McCormick. But does that trump, you know, if somebody in Old McCormick wanted to subdivide the lot, would they be able to, or no, their CCRs trump that?
I'm not intimately
I'm just
familiar with
curious.
CCNRs, but yeah, I mean, it's a city process. Somebody could come in and request, and we would process it consistent with our code.
There is something in the state law, though, that says CCNRs and covenants that existed prior
Right.
to the passage of the law are not required to comply with the law. The legislature could take that away at some point, but at least right now, I believe that they included this safeguard for existing subdivisions and CCNRs.
Right, that's what I was wondering, but whether you don't have a HOA, you know, or CCR, then somebody can say, hey, I want to subdivide my lot, and they're legally,
Yeah.
they have legal right to do so.
Ultimately, though, it would be the burden of the homeowners association to challenge the validity of the land use action, and
Yeah.
so they would have to contest it.
Doesn't everybody have an HOA in McCormick? Not
Oh, in
McCormick.
McCormick, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all governed there.
Right, but if you were saying the old McCormick and they wanted to subdivide it, I don't think you can with the.
No, they can't, right? That's the question about CCR, but a lot of our areas are not governed by CCRs, homeowners association. So this now becomes fair game to increase the density within the city.
Yeah, and I think what you're gonna run into in a lot of subdivisions is that you have older stormwater ponds that were designed for a certain amount of impervious surface coverage, and if there isn't room for stormwater treatment for the additional roof you're gonna put on the site, it just may not be possible because of technical reasons, not because of whether you have the land area.
Yeah, there are infrastructure
Yeah.
issues afterwards.
Yeah, so
Just
I
curious.
don't think you're gonna see a ton of that in
No.
the subdivisions that have happened in the last, 30 and 40 years, but I think in the older parts of the city or going down Sydney Avenue towards our new stormwater park, there's a lot of lots in there where this is definitely possible.
Right, possibility, sure. Thank you.
I've got a question though on a garage. You know, when we saw that garage, you know when you're going out to McCormick, where you're building like the ADUs next, you got a home and it's the top ADU and then right under that is a garage.
Mhm.
Do those two dwellings, the one on top and the house, do they share a garage together?
It depends on how it's designed and configured and what the ownership or lease says. So those are for lease, and so it's up to the landlord to manage who gets to park where.
I understood it to be, that to be the case, that one garage stall was for the ADU and one garage stall was for the home out front.
So it's kind of interesting. I wonder how that's gonna work.
We'll have to go back and look again.
Yeah. Two separate homes sharing a
Well,
garage.
I mean, if you think about like an apartment that's above structured parking, it's the same thing. It's just on a larger scale. So
Yeah, but if you have a garage door going up and down and you keep it open and one of the residents wants it closed for security, I mean, I don't know, it just seems like it could be very interesting.
yeah, I could see.
I do have a question about subdivision of lots. It sounds like a home such as mine, the ADU could be subdivided as its own fee simple lot. Is there anything saying that the lots have to be of equal size or it has to be of a minimum size?
No. So the unit lot subdivision, all of those minimum lot sizes, setbacks, they are not applicable to the unit lots. The setbacks are only applicable to the parent lot. So the perimeter of your lot has to have 10
Yeah.
feet in the front and 5 on the sides, etc. But you can divide it in such a way where the building can essentially be on that unit lot line. That's just the
So
perimeter.
the ADU could own the land that it's on basically.
Yeah.
And typically you would provide maintenance easements so that you can get in and paint your,
Okay.
the unit, but there's all sorts of considerations with regard to where the sewer lines and water services are that have to be part of unit lot subdivision.
So in any case, the unit lot subdivision process would not So for instance, R2, you could get 4 unit lots on a parent lot.
There aren't that many R3 lots, are there?
No, there's more R3 than R4, but yeah, I mean, the majority of the city is R2. So there's some additional supportive amendments. All the definitions are in 2012 that are required of HB 1110, so that's all the building types, unit lot subdivision, reference parent lot, unit lot subdivision. We're also proposing an adjustment to the steep threshold. And so remember we said we can't apply standards, although we can apply processes, I've recently found out, that differ from detached houses. So currently our exemption threshold for SEPA is 4 units. Our short plat process currently allows the creation of 9 lots. So if you have a 5-lot short plat, while it's an administrative review, we still have to do a SEPA determination because it crosses that threshold. This amendment bumps that up to 9, which covers all those middle housing types and also covers our short plat process. And for unit lot subdivision, a lot of your packet is just referencing unit lot subdivision. So 20.100, 02, 22, 80, 82, all of those unit lot has been included in there. We've restructured the use table in 20.39 and called out each one of those building types so that it's very clear that, okay, a duplex is allowed here and there. We've also refined the overlay districts. Currently, the McCormick Overlay District has all the building types that are allowed there. We've redirected that back to 20.32, which we discussed earlier. So all those standards apply citywide, whether you're in the overlay district or not. We've also restructured the downtown height overlay district, and we've renamed it the height overlay district and just applied that to all the height overlays throughout the city, with the exception of the view protection overlay district. We've also created a series of maps to try to increase clarity on that, and then one larger overall map. But now there's a uniform way to apply all those height overlays throughout the city. And so, like I said before, the Planning Commission and Land Use Committee have discussed this at every meeting this year, January, February, March, April, and May. We provided our draft amendments to the Department of Commerce in April. They did provide some feedback, and after a little back and forth, they reduced their number of comments to 2, and so we've addressed those in the draft that's in front of you tonight. The responsible official issued a SEPA determination, DNS, on April 29th, and we have scheduled a public hearing at the June 3 meeting, and then we've tentatively scheduled for your consideration on June 17th so that we can get this adopted by the end of June. And so all of the draft amendments have been made available on the city website, and then here's the zoning map for you, Fred.
Thank you. Yeah, this is where I was wondering, like, what percent, well, not percentage, but how many of the lots are zone 1 and 2? And 3s? Which would be most effective?
I'd be happy to run that calculation for you. I can't do it here, but yeah, the city is predominantly R2.
And when Jim was talking earlier about complying with the Tier 2 city framework, which would hit that threshold in a couple more years, essentially what we would do is just get rid of the R1 zone and everything that's R1 becomes R2, and then we're compliant. So it's a pretty easy change to get there, and so we'll look at moving that forward here in anticipation of hitting 25,000 new population in a few years. And part of the reason that's not in this ordinance is we wanted to do more outreach to those homeowners so that they knew that that change was coming, and there just wasn't time for it by the June 30th deadline. So we kind of pulled that out of this ordinance for now, and we'll tackle that at a later date.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Brings us to item C.
All right. So this one should be pretty quick. The 2025 comprehensive plan amendments are currently at the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission did hold their public hearing at their last meeting at the beginning of May. They decided to leave the record open for additional testimony. There was a little bit of concern from some of the neighbors on the proposed Mike Diaz map amendment, which is changing some properties from industrial to residential. There was concern about traffic that would be using an existing private road easement, and so the Planning Commission tossed around the idea of, rather than giving that an R3 zoning, going forward it would be R2, so there would be potentially less impact. And so the Planning Commission's recommendation has not been issued yet, and we'll see how that one unfolds. The other amendments that are in this year's batch of amendments, we had 6 total amendments. A few of them aren't moving forward. One of them is the Sherman Avenue Stormwater Park, which we wanted to adopt the park plan into the comprehensive plan. It just isn't ready. That's been going slower than expected with our reduced staffing. And so that one has been dropped. We also had an applicant withdraw another map amendment, and they are instead pursuing a rezone with the hearing examiner because they didn't actually need a comp plan amendment. They just needed to rezone the property. Otherwise, the map amendments are all city initiated. McCormick also initiated one minor amendment to the capital facilities element related to a transposition error in the tables, which is going to impact how much credit they can receive if they choose to build one of our water projects. So there is a correction to the capital facilities element under the water projects because we had incorrectly put the wrong dollar amount next to the wrong project. We're adopting a new transportation improvement program, and it's not new, it's amended, and the amendments are shown in the draft document. I believe Chris color-coded those right, which ones were changed. And they're all relatively minor. It's mostly what is the total project cost, where are we expecting funding to come from for those projects, and then in what year are we going to complete the projects. The TIP is a 6 and a 20-year plan. So Tier 1 is the 6-year plan, Tier 2 is the 20-year plan, and so every year we update the plan so that the dates at the top of the table shift out 1 year, and some projects get completed and taken off the list, other projects get delayed and have to be sort of adjusted in terms of timing for when they will actually occur. Beyond that, Jim, did I miss any of the amendments here?
No.
All right. So it's relatively straightforward. I think the only controversial one is this map amendment involving the Diaz property, and so we'll see what recommendation the Planning Commission comes forward with. Our code requires that we adopt our comp plan amendments by the end of June. So this, like the middle housing code, we will be bringing forward for adoption in June, and so hopefully the Planning Commission makes a recommendation at their first meeting in June and doesn't have to schedule a special meeting, which then either causes council to miss its deadline or also have to schedule a special meeting. And remember, we canceled our last meeting of the month in June, so we're on a little bit tighter timeline than normal.
Were there written comments from the residents regarding the Diaz amendments? Because I saw the written comments from Palmer addressing those.
Yeah.
Not yet.
But I was just curious if any of the citizens wrote in, or did they just testify in person?
We've not received any written comment.
Yeah, and the reason that we had that turnout was we did do direct mailers to everybody within a certain proximity of the property. I think most property owners, when they received it, they kind of set it aside, and it was only one of them that actually read it and then started talking to all the neighbors, and then they all came out, and all of them wanted to testify about the impacts of development, not about the zoning change. And so we tried to refocus everybody and say, look, the only thing up for discussion right now is should this be industrial or should this be residential? And you need to ask yourself, would you rather live next to an industrial use or a residential use, notwithstanding any potential impacts of that development, which we would consider at a later date when there's an application for us. So I think that hopefully people's concerns a little bit more at ease, but a lot of people didn't seem to know that they had this easement and are questioning the validity of the easement for how it can be used. And I think we're going to probably end up with something, some sort of compromise, but we'll see what the Planning Commission comes back with.
It sounds like a lot of the residents are not even city residents, though.
Right, everyone who testified was a county resident because
But they
they're in
live
the,
adjacent to this project.
exactly.
What a
Yeah.
mess.
Yep.
Because this is the property I'm also, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's,
the argument for one.
yeah, it's off of Old Clifton.
That's it, yeah.
So in any event, you will see that at the June meeting. If you have any questions, please let Jim and I know. It'll get discussed again at Land Use Committee. We had it on the agenda tomorrow, just in case there was any follow-up. But this one's pretty straightforward, and not other than the one property and what the Planning Commission comes out with in terms of recommendation, should be pretty non-controversial.
Thank you, Mr. Mouse.
Should be.
That brings us to good of the order, team.
Oh, wait, I just had a question, sorry, still on this. It was on page 252. I was just, curious, when it says the home occupation.
So that's the middle housing item. We are not amending the home occupation code. That's just existing code language that happens to be in that chapter. And so when we're amending a chapter, we give you the entire chapter, and then we show the changes in red line. So that's a black text. It's not changing. It's existing code related to home occupations and home businesses.
Oh, but I was just kind of curious, because it says, then clarify on here, because it says the home occupation provides a service or product that is conducted wholly within dwelling unit. Customers and employees coming to the dwelling to conduct business are not allowed. So you can't do a business in a home?
There's different types of home businesses. So there's a home business, there's a home occupation. They all have different rules.
Right.
And some are more permissive than others. Some require additional review. So those are just definitions that are in a code that are part of a larger set of code, but none of that is up for discussion as part of middle house.
Well, no, but it was in here, and I crossed it, so I'm just like, you can't do,
Yeah,
some type of
you do the next one. Business.
down here.
Yeah, and it is.
I just thought it was kind of interesting, because on another one too is, you can only have like 4, you can't exceed, 4 garage sales in a year. And I'm going, what the heck, what is this? That's on page 257. And so I just thought that was kind of
Well, then you're conducting,
dictating quite a bit.
well, then you're conducting business, and it's not a garage.
And that's considered a store.
Yep. So,
Well,
Okay.
I thought that was interesting.
so back to good of the order. Yes.
The only thing just a reminder that Mosquito Fleet Week is
Yes.
on
This weekend.
Saturday and Sunday, and we have an open house on Sunday here at the City Hall.
Open house or ribbon cutting at what time?
Oh, so
is
we
that?
can get into the
2:30?
downstairs.
I believe so, I'm not 100% sure. There will be cookies and water provided, because I'm providing them.
Oh, nice.
And I wanted to just, for the good of the order, let everyone know that parking enforcement has been out on Saturdays issuing warnings. This coming weekend is the first weekend that we will be writing tickets, and so we've done several weeks in a row now of putting warnings on people's vehicles where they're violating time restrictions, and so it is possible to get a ticket this
And
weekend.
people will be surprised.
Would you have said that we would have issued tickets?
I think our parking officer said that he gave 14 warnings this last Saturday, so it was fewer than we expected, and I think it's been trending downward since we've been providing the warnings. So I think the people who are, well, I'm only speculating, but I suspect there are business owners downtown who have been parking downtown, didn't think they had to move their car, and they're getting the notice, and then they're not repeating it, so.